let's talk about one of the biggest, longest, and most brutal slave rebellions in all of human history. Seriously. It was a war that lasted for over a decade and nearly brought a massive empire to its knees. And yet, most of us have never heard of it. This is the story of the Zanj Revolt.
To really get a sense of the scale we're talking about here, you just have to look at this quote from the historian Henry Louis Gates, Jr. He puts the Zanj right up there with legends like Spartacus in Rome and Toussaint Louverture in Haiti. That's the level of epic struggle we're diving into.
And believe me, that comparison is spot on. For 14 straight years, way back in the 9th century, a huge army of enslaved people deep in the swamps of what is now Iraq waged an all-out war against the Abbasid Empire, which was, one of the most powerful empires on the planet at the time.
14 years. Just think about that for a second. From 869 all the way to 883. This wasn't some riot that got put down in a week. No way. This was a full-blown war of liberation. They conquered cities, they defeated armies, and they even built their own independent state right in the middle of enemy territory.
But to really understand how something this incredible could even happen, you first have to understand the conditions that lit the fuse. We've got to go to the place where it all started, the swamps of despair. So the people at the very heart of this story were known as the Zanj. Now, this was a collective Arabic term used for many different peoples captured along the coast of East Africa, who were then shipped to the Middle East and sold into slavery. And it is absolutely crucial to see how they were viewed by many of the writers at the time. The stereotypes were just deeply racist and dehumanizing. They were painted as unintelligent, forgetful, even pathologically criminal. This kind of thinking wasn't just words on a page. It was a weapon. It was the justification for their brutal exploitation. So what was this exploitation? Well, their main job was just unbelievably awful. They were forced into these vast salt marshes in southern Iraq and had one task: scrape off the salty top layer of the earth, this mineral crust called natron, so the land underneath could be farmed. It was just endless, soul-crushing work.
And we're not talking about small groups of people. This was basically an industrial-scale operation. The Zanj were crammed into these enormous labor camps, some holding anywhere from 500 to 5,000 people. Think about that. Trapped, guarded, and worked literally to death.
And as if the work wasn't bad enough, they were systematically starved. Their food for the day was just a couple of handfuls of flour, maybe some semolina and dates. That's it. So you've got this combination of horrific labor, disease, and starvation. It created a powder keg just waiting for a spark.
And that spark finally arrived. He was one of the most mysterious and charismatic leaders you'll ever read about, a man named Ali Ibn Muhammad. Ali's journey to becoming this great revolutionary leader is, well, it's not what you'd expect. He wasn't one of the Zanj himself. In fact, he started out as a poet in the Caliph's court. He tried and failed to start other rebellions, but then, in 868, he got to Basra, saw the absolute misery of the Zanj, and he knew this was his moment. He went straight into those marshes and started organizing. And all that organizing finally boiled over on September 7th, 869. The revolt officially kicked off when Ali's followers intercepted a group of 50 slaves being marched to the marshes. That was it. From that one small act, the rebellion started to grow like wildfire. The war for freedom had begun. Okay, and this is where the story goes from a rebellion to something truly astonishing. Because the Zanj didn't just fight back against their enslavers. They went on to build their own nation, right from scratch. Almost overnight, these exhausted laborers transformed themselves into a fearsome army. They were armed with basically nothing but their own desperation and whatever weapons they could capture, but they started winning. And with every victory, more and more people from the camps flocked to join them. Their momentum was just unbelievable. After some early wins in 869, they captured a key port city the very next year. Then by 871, they did the unthinkable. They conquered Basra, one of the richest and most important cities in the entire empire. And, maybe most importantly, they founded their own capital, a fortress deep in the swamps they called Al-Muktara, the chosen city. So, the big question is, how on earth did this state, built by formerly enslaved people, survive for 14 years against a global superpower? And how did it all end? Well, it really came down to a perfect storm, a kind of strategic stalemate. The Zanj had huge advantages.
They fought a guerrilla war, they knew the swampy terrain like the back of their hand, and they were literally fighting for their lives. The Abbasid Empire, on the other hand, was kind of a mess at the time. They had all sorts of political chaos at home and were already busy fighting other wars all over the place.
But, an empire like that isn't just going to let this go forever. Eventually, its patience ran out. Once he was free from those other conflicts, the de facto ruler of the empire, a guy named Al-Muktara, made destroying the Zanj his #1 absolute priority. And when the empire finally brought its full might to bear, the final offensive was just overwhelming. Al-Muktara put together a brand new army of 10,000 men and even built a special fleet of boats just for fighting in the swamps. His forces offered amnesty to any Zanj who defected, which slowly chipped away at their numbers. They just systematically, brutally cleared the rebel territory inch by inch, until finally in August of 883, the Zanj capital fell and the revolt was crushed. And just like that, the war was over. But its legacy is, well, it's complicated. For 14 years, hundreds of thousands of people fought, died, and even built a nation, all in the name of freedom. And yet, for most of the world, it remains a completely forgotten piece of history. And that really leaves us with one final big question, doesn't it? Why is it that pretty much every kid in the world learns about Spartacus, but the story of the Zanj, a struggle that was just as epic and lasted way longer, is almost completely unknown? It makes you think about who gets to write history and whose stories we decide are worth remembering. Something to chew on for sure.